Across the hall from the parlor is our sitting room. And this is the room where the family gathered to spend time together. So it's the equivalent of our living room today. Only the family is going to hang out in here, so no guests or visitors are going to show up in here. This is a private space, and this is the spot where just the family are going to be spending a lot of their time. Now, when Minerva fell ill, this space became more of a sick room, and so George built the library, or had the library built on the back of the house, and that took the place of the family sitting room, an office, and his library. Today we use that as our gift shop. Now the bed is in here because this is also their summer bedroom. And they had their winter room upstairs, and we'll do a video tour of that at some point in time too. We have it done. We'll edit it and put it up here soon. So they had to be very clever about how they kept warm in the winter and cool in the summer, and part of the way they did that was with where they slept, their carpeting and floor coverings, and also their bed coverings. So right now we have the bed hangings up. In the winter they would put these bed hangings up, and then they would close the curtains at night, and so all of these closed, like you can see on the other side over here. So they would close these curtains up at night, and that would keep the heat from them while they were sleeping, their body heat. It would keep it trapped kind of inside there and allow for them to stay a little bit warmer than they would otherwise. They could also use bed warmers and things like that. Of course, the fireplace is fairly close to the bed as well. Now in the summer, those bed curtains come down, and they would put up some mosquito netting up, and that would keep them from having the bugs bother them at night. They may not have known that bugs caused illnesses, like, Minerva had malaria. They may not have known exactly where it came from, but they did know that, the bugs bothered them while they were sleeping at night, and so that was one of the things they would do. Now, another thing is the carpeting. So in the summer, this carpet was pulled up and cane matting or floor cloths were put down, and we know this because George Merle's niece, Emily Merle, came out here and stayed for the summer of 1850, and while she was out here she kept a diary of the things that she had seen, and she mentioned that they were pulling the carpeting up and covering the furniture and things. Now this carpet was made with a barn loom, so what they would do is they would weave these carpets, and you can see right here the seam, and so they would weave these carpets, and then the other seam is just here. So they would weave them on a big barn loom, stitch them together, and then they would place them on the ground and then tack them down, and you can see here where they tacked them, and that was their wall-to-wall carpeting. Then they would pull this up and, of course, put down floor cloth or cane matting. The floor cloth that they put down is something similar to this. Basically the precursor to linoleum. It's canvas or another thick material that was painted with so many layers of paint that it became just like our linoleum today is. And so that's what they would use. They started out on the table, from what I can understand, in records from France, to protect the table, and then they moved under the tables, and then people started using them all over the place. And they would, in a lot of paintings that I've seen and some research and everything, like this carpet here, they would do this but with a floor cloth, and it would just cover their whole entire, their entranceways, their rooms, and all that stuff. But that's one of the ways that they kept warm in the winter. In the summer, like Emily mentioned, they pull the carpet up, and that would allow the cool air from the basement to come up and kind of keep the family a little bit warmer or cooler in the summer. Now, in this room, we also have a silhouette to represent Peggy. So Peggy was one of the enslaved people that were on George's list after the Civil War. He made up a list of all the property that he had lost out on, and Peggy, at 22, was listed on this list. And so whenever we hear nurse used in context of a plantation setting to describe an enslaved woman, it tells me that there are one of three possibilities about this woman. One, either she nursed a sick person. Two, she cared for the plantation children and also possibly the plant, that includes all the enslaved children and the owner's children. And or she was a wet nurse. The person I assume that Peggy would have been caring for, because they're not likely to put a nurse on a plantation of this size in charge of caring for enslaved people who are ill. So the person that I assumed she would have been caring for would be Minerva. So, but she would have been 15 at that time, and I can't find any evidence that a 15-year-old would be nursing the mistress of a plantation. And I also don't have any kind of evidence as to her being mentioned in any kind of letters or diaries or anything like that. So Emily, the niece again, she mentions her enslaved woman who was her personal servant, and that her name was Margaret. And she mentioned Margaret taking care of her, acting as a nurse, a chaperone, all these things. But she never once mentioned Peggy in context with, she didn't mention Peggy at all, but also she didn't mention anybody who was taking care of Minerva during her illnesses. And Minerva was sick, and Emily did mention her illnesses in the house while she was here in her diaries and things. So that leaves her being a nurse in the other form of the word, being a childminder, a nanny, those kind of things, and or a wet nurse. So within the time frame that we're talking about here, George and Amanda's living son, George Ross Merle, would have been about 10 months old at the time of the Civil War coming to the Cherokee Nation. Before his birth, however, there were definitely children on the property. So we have Eliza, the house cook. We have her younger children, who were Johnson, who's 10, Peg, who was 6, Emmeline, who was 2, and then we also have Mose and Patience kids, Para, 3, Mary, 1, and Eliza, who was 5 years old. And then also Lydia, who was 7. Now, according to most research I've done, some of these kids would have been old enough to go to work, but not the younger ones, not the ones that are younger than 5. Most of the enslaved memories, the interviews that are done with them afterwards, the evidence that other people have come up with in their research that I've looked at, it all says that kids younger than 5 generally stayed around the house and weren't expected to do the labor of the rest of the plantation. So if Peggy's a nurse, they likely would have been her responsibility. Somebody had to watch these kids, and it most likely wouldn't have been Eliza because she was having to cook for everybody, and we already discussed how Southern culture was really important. Food was really important to Southern culture. And since they had a nurse listed, it would have been Peggy. All right, so does that mean Peggy could have been a wet nurse? That I do not know. It was done more often than not. Many plantation mistresses had their children breastfed by their enslaved women. I hesitate to say Peggy was one of the women forced into that role because she's not listed as having children in George's paperwork. Wet nurses were women who were breastfeeding their children or who were producing milk. If Peggy hadn't given birth sometime around the time George was born, then she wouldn't have been able to breastfeed George. So I'm assuming that she's probably the person who's taking care of the kids on the plantation at the time. And of course, I'll update that information as I find more evidence on the situation. But as of right now, I am certain that she was taking care of the kids on the property, on the plantation, most likely George as well. Now, we also have a couple of portraits. One is Lewis Ross, and that's him. And he was the father of Minerva and Amanda and Mary Jane. She lived here as well. And then we have Fanny Ross. And so these are original portraits. Trying to get the glare off of it so that you can see. This one has been restored for us, and she looks absolutely amazing. It looks like there's a possibility that she's in mourning, all of her clothes being what they are, but it's partial mourning because you can see her cuffs, and then also her collar there, and her head covering, her headdress there. So there's a possibility she may have been in mourning, or it could have just been at her age that she's getting this portrait painted. That might have been the fashion for the older ladies. I'm not sure. And then the furniture that we have in this room, like the rest of the house, in the rest of the mansion, it was owned either by the Merles and used here in the house while they were living here, or it was owned by a family member at the time, and then later it was donated to us. So that is the sitting room. If you have any questions, comment down below. You can also email us at huntershome@okhistory.org. Our grounds are currently open to visitors as well, and those hours are Tuesday through Saturday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. We offer a reduced price admission while the mansion itself is enclosed. So today it's Wednesday, June the 24th, and of 2020. So we're offering reduced price admission for the grounds of the house at the moment. So if you guys have any questions or comments, let us know.